Welcome to our 8th episode in the 11-episode series of the hemp webinars put on by the New Zealand Hemp Industries Association. Today I'd like to, gives me great pleasure on behalf of the New Zealand Hemp Industries Association's executive to welcome our speakers today, our panellists today. We have Matt Johnson, the co-founder of Hemp Connect, and one of the first vertically integrated hemp companies in New Zealand. And we have Simon Holst, the Senior Advisor for Food and Beverage Team from New Zealand Food Safety, to talk us through those aspects of the industry as well. Today we're covering off the food side of things, how it is made, growing the seed crops, packaging and marketing, compliance and considerations, scaling to meet the export potential. So we're going from the field to the plate today. So that's quite exciting. And without further ado, I will hand you over to Matt, who's going to kick us off this morning. So Matt, over to you. Thank you, sir.
Kia ora everyone, and great to be here, and big thanks to Richard and the NZHIA for putting on this webinar series and helping educate the populace of New Zealand. Today I'm going to be talking to you about food and a large part of the value chain that we're involved in. So I have a lot to cover, and I'll do my best to be broad and dive into areas that I think could be of value to everyone listening. But if I skip over anything quickly, just feel free to put the questions in the Q&A and I'll do my best to answer them before the session's ended. Sorry, there we go. So what we're going to try and do is cover how we get from the photo on the left to a final food product that can be used in human consumption on your right. So we're going to talk about farming and harvesting, processing and packaging and marketing and a little bit of export strategy. So farming, big ticket item. There's sort of 5 key points for farmers that I let people know when they're asking what do we do to get involved in the industry. The first 2 are compliance, one being your MPI level 1 license that you need because you're cultivating a raw grain for human consumption, and the second being your Ministry of Health license because you're cultivating cannabis, and without it, it's an illicit plant. So very important to get those 2 things, or the paper pushing, done early on. And the next 2 parts are sort of your logistics. So you're harvesting and you're drying, and you need to be really well organized through this component because it's the pinnacle of the season. You need to make sure you've got your harvest contractors and your drying all sorted because it can be a peak time for lots of other crops that are going on as well. And you need to monitor your farm with a lot of diligence. Walk through it every day, understand it, and know what is happening on your field. Internationally, we look for a ripeness level of sort of 70 to 80% ripeness on the seed or the heads. But it sort of pains me to say that that's not what we look for in New Zealand. We are under extreme bird pressure, and that is our trigger for harvesting. So we have a tipping point where our seed is ripening faster than the birds can eat it, and then we cross over and the birds are eating it faster than we can ripen the seed. So at that tipping point is when we want to be harvesting. So I would encourage you to walk the field in the mornings when the bird pressure is, I suppose, at its maximum, and understand that, and 10 days out, you know, be calling your contractor, or if you've got it on field, that's obviously great, but just make sure you get the timing with that really right. You don't want to let a whole season go because you've missed it, you've missed the mark essentially. Drying is another really important part. This will be a theme throughout my whole talk, is where, you know, we're producing a really high value crop and there's a lot of inputs that go into it, and you need to make sure that it's, you know, you're doing this with utmost diligence. So you need to get the crop or the seed dried within the first 2 to 4 hours of coming off the field. This is not when you turn the combine off. This is once you start harvesting. So do a loop of your field, empty it, and get it off to a drying facility as fast as possible. Otherwise, you'll end up with a very expensive pile of compost. You sort of know you're doing well when you're coming off at 15 to 20% moisture content, but as I just mentioned, that's sort of irrelevant. It all comes down to the bird pressure. And what I mean by drying low and slow is if you dry really fast, generally you'll be applying a lot of heat to your crop, and you won't get a consistent, I suppose, you won't dry it consistently. So the outer component of the seed might be a lot drier than the inner component. And if you flash dry it, you can also create cracking in the seed, which I'll touch on later, but obviously exposes it to light and oxygen, which is far from optimal. The last point is sort of have a plan. Think about all the little logistics. So if you are drying off-site, make sure that your person that you're going to dry it with has a seed license, because otherwise you can't dry it to them, and it takes time to do all these things. And the big question, what are you growing for? If you're growing for a company like Hemp Connect and you want to just sell your seed immediately, I would encourage you to reach out early, and so you can have an agreement in place and you know what you're trying to achieve with the seed. And if you have that close relationship, you minimize the chance of your seed being rejected and maximize your chances of having a good season. So yeah, those are the 5 key points that I always tell people, and I really encourage you to pay a lot of attention to them. The other things to consider are fertility, what cultivar you're going to sow, your sowing quantity, sowing date, and scale. So when we're growing for seed crops, I wouldn't say it would be worth it to do anything less than 5 hectares. That's sort of a trial amount to see how it goes, but there's a lot of things that come into it when you're doing scale. Partners are willing to work with you a lot more as you're going to be beneficial, contractors, seed dryers, everybody essentially. So yeah, I'd consider those things, and fertility, don't let anybody ever tell you that hemp's an easy crop to grow. Though it is very easy to grow, it's very difficult to grow really well. And hemp is a hungry crop, so make sure that you've got the right fertility on farm and that you're taking all the right normal agricultural steps. I'll talk quickly about economics because it's always an important thing with any venture. This is a rough guideline, and obviously every farm will be different for what you can manage yourself and what you have to outsource. So I've put the sort of lower quartile and upper quartile numbers in here. There are obviously a few outliers, complete failures, and I've heard last season, which every farmer will know was a really dry, tough season, but people were still getting above 1,400 kgs to the hectare in some locations on unirrigated land. So that's pretty fantastic when you start plugging those numbers. And if anybody wants these after the fact, they can come to Richard and we'll make sure you get them. Processing. This is this sort of high level component of the processing. You can find out a bit more information on our website about this, but essentially, we come in, we dress the seed, we dehull the seed, which will give us a byproduct of husks. We press the oil, which will give us a byproduct of cake, which we can refine into protein powder or flour. And then we package and bottle. And this is a really critical point, and I'll touch on this a little bit as Richard's asked me to, but it's, again, the really high volatility of hemp, especially the omegas. can degrade really quickly if we don't protect them. So this is what it should all look like when you are doing it right. Dressing, we've had to redress every single batch of seed that we've had come through our processing facility. So much so that we now put it in our growing contract that we must undertake the dressing on behalf of our farmers. And that saves them a lot of, well, basically paying for the same service twice, which you don't want to do. I can't stress this point enough that we're producing a product for human consumption, and we face international price pressures, and we're more expensive to produce. Nobody wants to pay a premium price for an inferior product. So at whatever part of the value chain you're participating in, you need to make sure that you're doing everything with a lot of diligence and that your product, while in your care, remains in the optimal condition. So obviously, if we're not dressing to 99.9% purity, we're not getting a perfect oil. And you can see what the oil in the heart should look like if you have undertaken the process properly. Again, to the point of packaging. So, well, actually, I'll look back into farming for 1 second. So if you dry low and slow, you can avoid the cracking on the seed, which keeps or helps preserve the integrity of the nutrition inside. But that's also more relevant once we actually process the product, because obviously it's in its most vulnerable state. So it's really important that you use non-transparent packaging. And I know this is a hard one for anybody out there to suck up, because there's obviously a lot of data that says if we're marketing products, we have an over 30% premium uptake if we've got transparent packaging so the consumers can see the products inside. But I'm not saying what's right to do from that point of view, but we believe it's important to keep the products in optimal condition so that the consumers are really getting the best bang for their buck, essentially. So this is moving into the, I suppose, marketing aspect of it. And this is what we're doing currently to help educate the consumers. We find that people using hemp, or once they've been converted to it, are generally extremely loyal. However you convert them, whether that be a conversation or a market stall or an e-commerce channel, creating awareness and encouraging them to get involved is sort of the step that we're at right now. We've only got the really early adopters using hemp, and there's a huge market space for us to tap into once we can go a little bit more mainstream. And one of the key things is, with all superfoods really, is people buy them because they know they're fantastic, but they don't understand how to use them or incorporate them into their diet. So quite often you'll find a packet of hemp hearts at the back of a pantry or equivalent, and it's just really, for us at the stages, about encouraging them and enabling them to optimize and use the hemp products so that they're repeat customers, which is obviously fundamental for the whole growth of the industry. If you want to check out some more recipes, these are obviously all on our website too. Marketing and international distribution. So I put this slide here as it briefly discusses the benefits of hemp. But what differentiates us as Kiwis? I wonder if we can put in the comments, does anybody know the answer to that? Because when you look at, if we choose hemp hearts from Canada, China, Europe or Australia, will all be the same as New Zealand hemp hearts. So though it has this fantastic array of health benefits, how are we going to compete when it's more costly to produce here? And are we competitive? And the answer from my point of view at this stage is we're not doing anything to create that perceived value. We're facing a typical agricultural dilemma in which many industries have walked before us before they realise they need to change tact. And that's fighting or moving into the commodity space, which I believe has been a theme throughout this whole webinar series. And the reality is that I won't say never, because never say never, but we'll struggle to compete with those other nations if we're just fighting in the commodity space. So we need to create perceived value and leverage our New Zealand story in order to be able to market New Zealand hemp, not only domestically, but to the world. There's a huge scope for people to get involved and make an impact on selling New Zealand made products and developing them into value-added world-class products that I believe was touched on a bit yesterday. We're really just at the start of it now, and it's so immature at this stage, which means there's really a lot of opportunity. As I mentioned, we've just got the early adopters consuming hemp, and there's a large portion of the market space left to come. So that's whatever I can cram into my little short section, but I wanted to leave a lot of opportunity for Q's and A's at the end. And if anybody has any questions about the components that I've just discussed through the vertical integration of the hemp food space, please feel free to reach out to Richard or myself, and we will certainly do our best to assist you. So thank you very much for listening, and I will hand it back to Richard.
Well done, Matt. Thank you very much. And possibly, if you would like to share those slides, we could possibly send them out with the email afterwards to the recorded version. So that's an option as well. So you just let me know. Thank you, Matt. That was a really interesting presentation, Matt, because it's and again, you've done an amazing job, as many of our speakers have had, to raise to the challenge of getting such an awful lot of information into such a short speaking slot. Hopefully, as you said, we'll discuss some of those questions and answers as we go through. We do have one that's come through from Boss at the moment. Is the Central Plateau climate suitable for growing hemp, Rotorua, and the soil fertility good, but temperatures, late frosts are common? Any comments on that, Matt?
Depends on the soil type in the region. Obviously, across regions, there's a wide variation. And you can always supplement fertility and well, do things to amend your soil and get the conditions appropriate for any soil type. I guess with farming, it's always about your inputs and your outputs. So if you can save a lot of costs on your inputs, I suppose your general season or your net profit at the end of the season will be great. But we have had a wide range of crops across the whole country, actually, as far down south as Gore and as far up as Northland come to our facility. And we've heard horror stories and success stories across the whole nation as well. So it's really, we're really early on, and I can't comment too much about the specific farm, but if you'd want to have that conversation offline and we can go into a bit more detail, I'd be really happy to help and assist in any way I can.
Thanks, Matt. It's really an interesting, that question around which is the best farm, because as you said, hemp will grow anywhere, but it will grow best where you've got some good inputs, and I think that's a massive part. And also we've got to look at the varieties that we're dealing with as well, which will improve. And then there's planting dates, which will be affected by late frost and soil temperatures, because all those things will add to the the variability of the the germination rates in your particular area. But before we take a deep dive into all aspects of the food through the value chain, let's go to Simon and hear some of the compliance issues from our MPI friends, and then we'll come back and rejoin in the Q&A. So Simon, if we could have your presentation, please. Sorry, Simon, I've made you mute there, so I'll unmute you.
Cool. Do I have, can I present?
Yeah, so you should have the co-host, so you should have a screen share down the bottom.
Oh, yeah. I'm looking at the wrong place. Sorry.
That's no problem.
Do that one. Sorry, guys.
Hey, you're away. Here it comes. So you just got to open it up.
Yep. Here we go. There we go. Cool. Well, kia ora koutou katoa, everyone. Thanks for the invite, Richard. It's nice to be here. What I'm hoping to do today, hopefully not too much compliance stuff, in fact, but just talk you through a little bit about the Food Act and what that means to hemp or growers of hemp seed or hemp seed foods. We'll sort of start at the beginning. So growing, well, one of the things I'd like to just reiterate is that it's interesting hearing a farm to fork approach being talked about, because that is very much what the Food Act 2014 takes. Unlike previous sort of food rules in New Zealand, the Food Act does actually cover horticultural production. So that's relatively new, and that's what, as Matt pointed out before, if you are growing hemp seed for use as human food, the Food Act does apply to you. So yeah, but the Food Act is a flexible risk-based approach that it adopts, and effectively that means the level of regulation you face is actually determined by the level of risk your product or your process poses. So to reflect that, we have a number of tools under the Food Act. If you're a higher risk product, and you know, I'll give you some more examples later on, you will be required to operate under a food control plan, or FCP, we abbreviate that. If you are a lower risk product or a medium to low risk product, you'll be subject to a national program, or NP. And there are 3 levels of national program, 3 being for the medium to high risk products, MP2 a little bit lower, MP1 lower still, and that covers things like growing. There are also some very low risk activities that people may carry out that actually don't need to be registered at all. Richard and I had a brief chat about these yesterday, and one example of that would be if you were just a retailer of a manufacturer pre-packaged, it's a great shelf-stable product, great name, you actually don't need to register because that poses very little risk indeed. Same if you were, some horticultural producers can actually operate under, you know, aren't required to register, but that's really if you are producing and selling from the same site. So if you had or direct to the consumer, I don't really see that, actually that really can't apply to hemp seed, because to be sold as food, it has to be dehulled, and in fact that requires registration, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So yeah, as I mentioned, higher risk activities or foods or processes, for example, making a hemp milk would require a food control plan. Just growing hemp is at the other end of the spectrum, and hemp seed for food, that is, would require a national program level 1. If you are actually doing some grain processing, including, I think, dehulling and things, that will take you to an MP2. If you were producing hemp seed oil, again, slightly higher risk, so you'd be national program level 3. I'll go through those in a bit more detail. We can start here. So again, starting at the lower end, if you were growing or transporting hemp seed for sale as food, you are subject to operate under a national program level 1. So when we say growing, that includes growing and minimal processing. It does actually include grain drying, or seed drying in this case, and sorting. But really no more than that. It's minimal processing only. Transporters. This is an area we're finding people still aren't fully aware of. If you are transporting any food product, including horticultural products that are intended to be food, you may be required to register. National programs, they're registered every 24 months, so once every 2 years. Most likely with your local council. At an MP1 level, you need to be checked, verified, we call it. That's checked by a food safety specialist. But that can be a one-off if you're at a national program level 1. Unless something goes wrong down the track, it might be a single verification only. As I mentioned before, if you are a seed processor, so if you're doing dehulling or milling to flour or making a meal, so if you were producing hemp hearts, you would be subject to a national program level 2. That also includes, and yeah, Matt had a wide variety of products there. And again, the way the Food Act works is the risk-based measure that applies. Food control plans and national programs, collectively, they're risk-based measures. Again, we love jargon. Sorry, I slip into it from time to time. I don't mean to. But the risk-based measure that applies depends on the product. So if you are making a shelf-stable grain-based product, so it might be a cracker or biscuit or muesli bar that contained hemp, or cereal actually. I didn't see any examples of cereals on Matt's slides, but that's another category that fits in here. That contain hemp seed, you would be subject to a national program level 2. Again, like all national programs, it needs to be registered every 24 months. The verification frequency for an MP2 is the natural verification frequency is once every 3 years. Again, if you were ever if there were problems for some reason, that verification frequency might be increased a bit. You know, if you're having trouble, yeah. So producing safe food, we might want to come and visit, or in fact, it's not really us that come and visit, but a verifier. We generally use third-party agencies to do the verification. Will come and do the checking on our behalf. They may come more often if yeah, again, there are problems producing safe food. So again, the higher level of national program, MP3, that covers things like the pressing of hemp oil, or you know, you could actually even make a product like a hemp margarine under a national program level 3. I don't know whether this would apply to hemp seed food producers. It does in some other industries like olive oils. There are some people who grow olives. They then send the olives out to an oil producer, and they get bulk oil back that they want to pack themselves. You know, when I say pack, I mean bottle themselves for retail sale. If you wanted to do that, you would require an MP3. Sorry, I'm going to jump back one step here, something I didn't mention. So the other thing the Food Act, the other way the Food Act works is if you've got multiple activities that span the different levels. So say you were an MP, you know, you were growing hemp seed and you were also pressing hemp oil, you require a single registration at the highest applicable level. So in that case, you would require an MP3, and that would cover you for your the producing the oil production and the growing. We don't want you to register twice. You know, there's no, yeah, we don't want to make people register more than they need to. Again, it's the single registration at the highest applicable level is all that is required. So again, if you did send your seed out for processing into oil and got the oil back and you wanted to bottle it yourself, you would need an MP3 registration. In fact, it's the same if you were also, the same thing would apply if you were packing a meal or a flour yourself for retail sale. You would also slot into that MP3 category. Again, registered every 2 years and verified. Again, checked by a food safety expert. The starting frequency for that is every two years. Again, there are some products that are going to require a food control plan. Again, food control plan, we're right up at the higher end of the spectrum now. These are either products or processes that convey a higher level of risk. Say you were producing a hemp milk, that would either need to be refrigerated or pasteurized to keep it safe. So it does require a higher level of control. So a food control plan needs to be registered every 12 months, and it's going to be verified initially. It'll be checked every 12 months. If you have 2 successive verifications and the outcome is good, that can be pushed out to once every 18 months. That's effectively a way to incentivize good behavior. I think, there's other products that would fit into the sort of FCP category. I saw Matt had a hemp cheese on his slide there. That would fall into this category. A hemp pesto. Again, it's not likely to be shelf stable. Or if you were processing it to make it shelf stable, again, that's a slightly more complex procedure, and would most likely require a food control plan. It is one of the interesting things about the Food Act is it does have this flexibility of, again, we want to take a risk-based approach. We only want to you to have to register under the appropriate level. That does sometimes create a little bit of uncertainty for people. We work with the Act every day. We know where people fit, but it's not always clear for people. So we have an online tool, My Food Rules. You can reach that through the MPI website. Or you go to MPI, then New Zealand Food Safety, and My Food Rules will appear on the menu. You can actually just Google search for My Food Rules MPI, and it will take you to the right page. And the tool, it's pretty, we like it. It's a shiny new toy, really. Well, no, it's more than a toy, because it will actually, you answer a series of questions. It'll ask you, you either give you options or ask you yes/no questions. If you tick the options that apply to you, in the end you work through, and it will eventually give you an outcome. It'll actually it tells you the type of plan or program that applies to you, and if you're operating under the Food Act, as most hemp seed producers would be, it will actually generate the plan for you, so you can actually download that plan from the tool and save that, and then you take that away. You do a bit of tailoring of that, filling in some details, and you can register that plan with either your local council or MPI. It does depend a little bit on the plan. There are a couple of other options that might apply to a hemp seed producer. So we have assessed some industry programs as being equivalent to a food control plan. So the industry bodies apply to us. They bring us these programs and say, will you recognise these as official templates? And we have done that for New Zealand GAP, Global GAP, and BRC horticultural programs. So if you were producing another food crop that you're working to New Zealand GAP through Hort New Zealand, you may find that your hemp production is already covered. I mean, because your Global GAP registration actually covers your Food Act registration. now, or your GAP registration, or your BRC Hort or Global GAP. Also covers your Food Act registration. Again, we don't want to make people register twice. So if you have one of those registrations, or you registered through one of those programs, that will at least cover your growing activities. If you did want to do more than minimal processing, you might kick back into the regular Food Act. I think we're going to take some questions later on. If anyone doesn't want to ask a question now, or you think of something later, you can email us at foodactinfo@npi.govt.nz with those questions, and we will try and answer them. Or if it, for some reason, isn't us, we'll hook you up to the right person, hopefully. Something else I thought I should mention as Matt went through his presentation is we do actually have a guide to labelling hemp seed products. I didn't think to include that in my slides, but in fact, again, I did have a quick Google as Matt was going through his presentation, and you can find that if you Google MPI guide to, or and hemp seed labeling, it will pop up, and that will talk you through, or help you work through what you need to put on a label if you are producing something other than a minimally processed hemp seed itself. One thing that, and I don't really want to get into compliance type speak, but one thing I would like to point out, that the labelling in New Zealand is covered under the Australian New Zealand Food Standards Code, and the scope of that does actually include health claims. So you have to be a little bit careful about claims you make about health-related things. Effectively, they have to be evidence-based. That applies not only on a packet, but you can't say anything on a website that you can't say on a packet. That's regarded as also effectively part of the labelling. So I just thought that was worth mentioning. You need to, again, I think there's a bit more information on that in the labelling guidance. So Richard, I think that's effectively it for me now.
Awesome, thank you. So if you could stop it. Thank you, Simon. And just out of interest, I'll just quickly see if I can find that's the guide to labelling food containing hemp seeds, the New Zealand Food Safety Guide. And if I just go back to stopping that screen share for a moment, and then the other one that you mentioned was the guide to labelling, which is again very similar guide as well, and both well written, and they all refer back to the food code, which has quite a bit of prescriptive information around THC and CBD content, of course, but it also has a lot about the packaging and the labelling. For example, using leaf and things. It's in alignment with our hemp regulations, which says that you can't label products that would indicate a psychotropic effect or a psychoactive effect. So they don't want you labelling a food product and trying to play on the fact that it could be a marijuana thing, which fortunately for most of our food manufacturers is the last thing they want to do, because that's one of the reluctance. One of the sticking points around education is, will I get high off eating hemp seed? Which of course you won't, because there is no THC in hemp seed. There is some traces on the outside of the seed, but a lot of that is normally processed off. But that's why they have some tolerances in the Food Act, because some of that will remain at some point in there.
Or it is possible. I mean, again, you're right, Richard. Hemp seed itself shouldn't contain any THC, but it is possible you can get a small amount of contamination from leaf or something if the product hasn't been properly cleaned, Matt. And so that's why there is a tolerance there. Again, I think that stuff is reflected in the guide. I also see, and again, I should have pointed that out, there is actually a page on the MPI website about hemp seed as food. That may be worth a visit as well.
Because there's some really good resources around that side of it from MPI, and of course all the general stuff that you were talking about, the MP1 labelling and the food plan, the guide that you've got now, which is a question and answer, end up with a result, which is really, really helpful to anybody getting started in that space. And then the councils can handle the verification, and I'm sure there's probably some consultants in there for the people that have got really in-depth sort of food control plan issues. But thank you very much, Simon, because that was really relevant to what we're doing, and it really speaks to people like Matt who are processing hemp seed. If you want to get them involved, you've got to be compliant, and nowadays it's all about traceability and things. So even the consumer wants this thing. So you've got the situation where you're thinking about best practice, and you're thinking, okay, well, I can adopt best practice, but then that may not be best enough for satisfying the processor or in fact what the consumer's demanding. So you will have to in some cases really open your and broaden your horizons to incorporate the whole value chain to make sure that you are compliant straight from the get-go, because as Matt said, there's nothing worse than producing a crop, doing all this work, and no one wants to, no one can use it. But I think it was interesting also, Matt, you were talking about the bird pressure. I think wind's in there as well, but that bird pressure is definitely one of the big ones for New Zealand. Any stories you'd like to share with that?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've been very fortunate that we haven't had a disaster, but there's certainly crops that have been completely falling in a few outliers that have been completely destroyed from birds. And that's just come down to being relaxed around harvest time and treating it like a normal crop or maize or something, where you're taking it off in relation to moisture. And I guess, that's the critical component. You just have to monitor it and be really diligent around that harvest period and just make sure that you come off at the right time, because every day, or if you makes such a big difference. So if you leave it for a week too long, you might have nothing left.
Yes. And I've seen nothing left. These birds can do a wonderful job. They can pick every seed out of a head very, very efficiently. And so that bird pressure, so it's very, very important if you are doing your minimum 5 hectares to be a commercial viable option for a farm, you've got to have your contractors all organised. Those ducks have to be in a row, because you've got to react pretty quickly when it's time. So having the right contractor with the right equipment is very important. And on the contractor note, this year it's come to light where a contractor, this is about, again, best practices, because they've got to, really look into cleaning their machines before they go on to the next product.
Absolutely.
Because that chance of cross-contamination can be an issue, because hemp seed is a Class C drug. So when you harvest your hemp seed, transport is excluded in the sense of transport companies are allowed to handle hemp seed, but when it gets delivered to a processing facility, that processing facility, whether it be a dryer or a dehuller or whatever, they all need to be licensed as well. So those are really critical, important parts that your value chain needs to all be considerate of the licenses. But going back to this one about the harvest, if you've taken, and contaminated your next harvested crop, that's not a good look for that person that's grown that crop either. So all sorts of complications can arise, and it did rear its head this year. Everybody reacted as they should have done. It was all reported, it was handled, and not a bad outcome in the end, but it has the potential to go real sideways on us. So everybody's got to really be careful of that. That quality control. And speaking of quality control, Matt, can you just, if we jump back to the packaging one, we talked about light proof, but there's also nitrogen flushing and things. It's such a critical part. You said that, it was a great example that you gave actually around how the marketers want you to be able to see the product. But from the NZHIA's point of view, from the food working group that we're working with to try and establish some of these best practices, there is no shortcuts. It's got to be light proof, no air, so nitrogen flushed, and so in the absence of heat as well, in your storage. So massive considerations. Are you finding that that's something that the industry is willing to do?
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, we're not the only ones for sure, but we can help assist with that. So we provide a contract packing option for people that want to use our facility, because as Simon was saying, we've got all the right compliance certifications and the technology to pack or press the products to the right sort of standards. So if you come through a contract manufacturer, you need to ensure that they're doing those things and making sure that they're vacuuming the oxygen out and nitrogen flushing the bottles and the packages. And it's extremely important for the, I suppose, preserving the nutritional value of the product. You won't have a long shelf life, and the oils can go rancid if they're exposed to light, heat and oxygen. So it's just an absolute must as far as we're concerned as well, and sort of no shortcuts around that.
And again, the industry needs to really react to this, because we don't want people getting poorly from eating hemp seed, or having hemp seed oil. Somebody buys hemp seed oil off the shelf and it's rancid. They don't know it's rancid because it's the first time they've tried it, and it's just, they'll never buy it again. And that's such a shock, because this is such a healthy food option for them. But so getting that education out is very important. And of course, if you do allow it to go into its past its use by date, it's still useful as an industrial oil, or you could stain your wood or clean your leather. There's still plenty of options after it's gone past its culinary use into an industrial use. So, but again, it's all about education. So I'm pleased that it does fall to the industry to raise that awareness. And that'll be an ongoing process. But the NZHIA needs to step up in that space as well, and try and support those industry players that are trying to do that. But thank you for the roundup on the packaging. It's just so important. We're dealing with a human food grade product, and there's no messing around. And Simon, probably asking you to, we probably don't want to hear any horror stories or anything, but how important is it? I mean, this is important for when we go export as well, quality-wise. Simon, do you?
Sure. I mean, I think you're right. There's nothing. There's probably well, I mean, food packaging legally has to keep your product safe. That's what that's pretty much, again, the Act is very high level on that. That's the point of packaging. But I think you're right. From your whole marketing point of view and consumer satisfaction point of view, there is. You're totally right. That wine growers have the same thing. If you get a corked bottle of wine, most consumers won't actually realise that it was just an issue with something as simple as corks. Thank goodness we're going to Stolwins or screw tops now. And they, the odds are they just won't enjoy that as much as they should. They'll never buy that product again. Same thing. If your packaging's not right, you get a stale product or an oxidized product, you're just going to think, wow, what was all this hype about hemp seed? I don't like this stuff. I'm not going near that again. It's that sort of, that's probably the most damaging thing. Yeah, we want, again, the Act requires that you keep food safe. But really, most packaging can achieve that. But it's the quality is so important as well. That's how you get, create the additional value for your product.
And this is what we're trying to do, isn't it? Create that additional value. And we've got really good qualities that suggest that we can create that because of our essential fatty acid profile, the amino acids that we heard about as well on Tuesday's presentation. So we've got all those qualities there, but if they're not coming through to the consumer, isn't getting that impact, then we're missing an opportunity there. And as Matt, just to get back to the export one, and thank you, Simon, for bringing up the wine industry, which is a great example of an industry that's coordinated in a, they're all in competition with each other, of course, and regional varieties. And these are things that possibly we can learn from our hemp seed oil, maybe as an example, to that premium market overseas. But if you've got any comments on the scaling and things that we need to consider to get offshore, Matt?
Yeah, certainly. I guess the wine industry, as you mentioned, is a fantastic example, and it really does come down to scale. We're not going to be able to cater to these international markets probably as individuals or as individual companies. It's going to take a group collaboration, I suppose, initiative to get us to where we need to be. The example in the wine industry that was really good and useful and how they were successful was they didn't go over as one individual Sauvignon Blanc, which was sitting very lonely on a shelf. They went over as a collective and had whatever the number was, 10 bottles of Sauvignon Blanc, and then there was a New Zealand section. And so as far as the consumers are aware, okay, well, New Zealand must actually produce a good Sauvignon Blanc, and it's proud and displayed well, rather than hidden amongst the thousands of bottles of wine that are available. And that's something that's really relevant with oil as well, because there's a hell of a lot of plant-based oils out there, and you need to be proud and showcase how good it is, and you don't want to be lost. So I think that's a great opportunity for us as a nation to, as we're all growing and scaling and ready to get to that export market, it's something that we certainly need to tap into and work together, because as a nation, we're probably going to be too small to do it as individual entities.
And I think those sort of cooperative arrangements really suit NZHIA. You know, they want to work with companies that are ready to export. So go global from day one is a great strategy, because, you know, really that's where the market is. Because let's just go back to the economics for a moment, and Matt, and one of your slides touched on it. And you know, the price, the farmer, it was $5 on your slide, but the international price is less than that. So the farmer is going to face pressure to reduce that price. Luckily, our plant breeding and their farming systems may improve, so the yields may go up. But I think it's important for the consumer to understand one of the ratios, especially around dehulled seed. It's phenomenal. You've got to put in sort of 3 kilograms of seed to get 1 kilogram of dehulled seed out. And people say to me, oh, it's quite expensive, to get them to understand why it's expensive. And of course, with the, you know, with your grading systems and things as well, Matt, you as a producer of the dehulled seed, how do you feel about that little gem of information being made public?
I mean, it's great, and we need to, you know, establish this awareness. You know, it's just over 25% yield of oil, well, closer to 27, but, you know, if you've got $20 of whole seed as a raw input, you know, it's expensive. And there's obviously two sort of components where we can fix that, is one being on the farm and one being through the processing facilities that are around. But, you know, we are so, I suppose, immature as a nation, and we all have a lot of work to do in our sections before we can even consider competing on a commodities basis, if we ever will. And I guess the New Zealand avocados is a good example of that. You know, we have roughly $80 million, I think, revenue for our avocado industry, and that's been flatlined because we can only export it to, well, sell it to New Zealand and Australia, because the Americans and Mexicans sell it everywhere else, and because it's a commodity.
So back to that theme, as you pointed out, that has been running through our webinars, is to move away from commodities into high value branded products that are going to global niche markets of discerning customers. Because it's similar, again, back to the wine industry. There's a lot of plant-based oil connoisseurs out there that are looking for the next greatest thing, and that might be the volcanic soils of Hawke's Bay, or it might be from you guys in Whanganui, and or from the grain belt in Ashburton. All of these things, you know, again, we need some more studies, but they're all part of the marketing mix available to the manufacturers. Yeah. And it is, you know, showing up to be quite a geographically dispersed industry. So there will be those regional varieties, as we've got with wine, I'm sure. The other interesting point around the drying process, such an important thing. I just wanted to re-emphasize that for all the farmers out there, because I've seen it. I've seen, you know, back 10, 15 years ago, people, you know, we finally get a harvester that's willing to, a contractor willing to do the harvest. Great, he does a great, well, they do a great job of harvesting it. Everybody stops for lunch, and we come back and there's steam coming out of the bin. and you're thinking, oh, that's not a good look, and you've turned it into compost, a high value product straight into compost, Matt. So it's just such a, driving out that moisture within 2 to 4 hours is such an important lesson that you know, people need to take on board. The other one that I just wanted to talk to as well was around our branding and our story, because of course going global, that means that we can leverage off our good name in that food space. You know, we've got a trusted name, and that's because of things like the Food Act and Simon and his team helping people to maintain that quality. But there's also the, you know, the supporting the New Zealand made product. And again, I guess that comes back to the economics, and you know, this is about consumer choice now. You know, they can see something that might be a slightly cheaper, which might be appropriate if they're, you know, in a bakery, but if they're wanting to use it at home, let's get them buying New Zealand made. And I should just also acknowledge Te Puni Kōkiri have got a great fact sheet, Tupu NZ, TUPUNZ, on hemp seed growing and hemp growing for fibre and seed. So that's a good resource, or a great resource to be able to use, especially for Māori landowners that are developing their land. So I just wanted to give a nod to that, and we will, Simon, be taking up the opportunity, and we'll reach out to the Hort NZ around their GAP, their gap, because I think that's important. Again, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. There's no need, you know? There's so many places that already do it. So and we can learn from the wine industry and avocado industry, and work with our other primary producing partners as well in that space. So we're just coming up to the end of the hour, but I just wanted to go back to our panelists and ask if there was any final comments that, having heard the conversation, and then we'll just touch on we've handled most of the questions that have come up in the chat. And thank you, Matt, for jumping into that chat space. Very, very good. Multitasking there. But Simon, having heard sort of the presentation and me rambling a little there as well, is there any other comments you'd like to throw in the mix to our emerging industry and what we need to get it right at our foundation stage to make it easier as we go forward?
Look, I don't know. I mean, everything you've been saying sounds sensible to me. I mean, I think there's I would say from other industries, the big thing is, you know, try and avoid that commodity end and get into those added value products, because, you know, that is where the, you know, where there's probably the most money to be made. And you know, olives would be another good example in New Zealand. You know, we seem to have, you know, when you look at olives and wine, we've got a good reputation for producing things with interesting flavour profiles. So, you know, maybe you can piggyback on the back of olives for olive oil, for hemp seed oil. You know, we win international prizes for our olive oil at international tastings and things. So, you know, there's probably some cool opportunities.
That's it. I think we need to have some international tastings down in New Zealand then, and hemp seed, and get involved in that, maybe introducing that worldwide. And Matt, from your perspective as a vertically integrated New Zealand-based hemp company, is there things that you'd like to add?
I guess, you know, as an industry, we're really young, and I suppose we can get caught up in this competition domestically. But I think, and I've talked to you about this in the past, Richard, that, you know, for any New Zealand industry in agriculture to be successful, it has to have a large export market. And so there are plenty of people that are willing to share what they've learned and help everyone avoid mistakes in this space and work together to grow together. So I suppose that's my signing off note, is that I'd encourage you to reach out. I'd encourage you to be collaborative, and I'd encourage you to ask questions, and you know, don't be afraid. It's a really cool space to be involved in, with, you know, huge opportunity. So I'd certainly put my hand up and say, feel free to reach out at any time with any questions. And I'm sure there are others in the industry that would say the exact same thing.
And people do reach out, so that's great, Matt, because as you pointed out, it's one of the wonderful things about our industry at this early stage is the collaborative nature and the support that's available. And, you know, we can learn a lot again from these other industries, because it is about competition as well. We can be both collaborative and cooperative and in competition, and that's all healthy. So plenty to do there. And thank you, Simon, also for bringing up some of the other bioactives that are out there, because they'll be touched upon in our next series on the health side, which is the 2 webinars next week, followed by our final webinar, which will be announcing some of the work that Dr. Nick Marsh has been doing in the space of looking at the feasibility and the way forward for our industry in the future, with a bit of a plan and some scenarios to 2030. So I do encourage you, all the viewers and the attendees, to follow on from our health ones, because those bioactives will be explored in a greater detail. But if we can start infusing those sort of things in, this food space is just mega for us, really, and we've got a great reputation to be able to contact into that export market, using the qualities of our inherent production, but also our good name as well. So thank you very much to our presenters today, Simon Holst from MPI and Matt Johnson from Hemp Connect. It's been wonderful to have you here today and listen to your comments and feedback. So looking forward to seeing you both at the Hemp Summit in May 2021, of course, in Rotorua. And we can really expand on these things, and hopefully you'll be an exhibitor as well, Matt, and we can sort of start to see some of these hemp foods in person. So looking forward to being able to taste them.
Can I just make one parting shot, Richard?
Please, Simon.
And that is, if you guys are thinking about exporting and you're a food product, particularly, we actually have an export regulatory advice service at MPI now, so feel free to tap into them if you've got questions about how to get into a market overseas, or what's involved in export. Really good place to start.
That's it. And start that journey early as well, because
yes, that would be one of their pieces of advice. Sometimes you can't go back. You can't undo stuff that you've done. So yeah, think about it early. Right
on. And Matt, did you want to get in there as well?
No, I was just saying, yeah, really good advice, Simon.
Lovely. Awesome. Okay then, guys. Well, I'm just going to hit the pause button there. Thank you again very much, and look forward to seeing you on the next series of webinars on health next week.
Excellent.
Thanks, Richard, and thanks for everyone who was tuning in.
Thanks all.